Hello, my name is Pokey Viking with a W, and welcome to the channel. I'm happy to have you. Um, this is a fairly new channel, and I would like to introduce you to what we will be discussing on this channel as we move along and as new videos start to pop up on YouTube. So the main focus will be mostly on investing in Europe and Europe exclusively. Also, I would like to talk about like investing on a budget, and we will naturally cover topics like sealed products, how to navigate the market in Europe, and also compare pricings for slabs, raw cards, and more, depending on what will be of the interest. So today's topic that I would like to discuss is how to navigate the European market overall, because from my experience, there's not a lot of coverage on this as far as I tried to research, and I've been in the space for about 6 years now, and I figured like, hey, it might be a good idea to start a Poke investing channel for us Europeans. So let's dive into it. So what options do you naturally have as a buyer and a seller? The most obvious ones are in modern times like eBay, Card Market, or also Facebook groups. Now, mind you that eBay in Europe is mostly restricted to the bigger countries. So, like for example, Germany. So, if for example, like countries that are not that heavily populated don't have their own domain. So these countries tend to also work through eBay.de, for example. But the other obvious choice is then like Card Market, and that's open like for everyone equally, and it's fairly different also in terms of fees. And Facebook groups, I think this is something that people tend to use overall in their near vicinity with people that are also investors or traders or like to exchange ideas in a more communicative and joint way of expressing. Then there's like this, like local card shops where people tend to gather. It varies depending on state and the density of the population there. And the less popular ones are like Amazon and like local trading card markets or even like trading card conventions where people gather. You can get like good deals overall on any kind of trading card market or convention. But with Amazon, I don't really feel like should be even considered like a buying place unless there's like various sales happening on and you are a person that naturally goes into Amazon. I tend to avoid it. Then there's Whatnot and for example like Discord groups, but Whatnot is a little bit different because it's also similar to eBay, not supported in most of the European countries. It's mostly supported, I think, if I recall, in UK, Germany, and France currently, but it tends to, and it might expand in the future. So it's a little bit different also when you consider like eBay, which is even if it's like under the domain of Germany, it's still open to other European countries. Then the most other types of social media are like Instagram and TikTok. Now, mind you, these platforms are regularly used depending on your preferences. What I tend to use is like more local approach, getting together with people, or even like selling or buying stuff on eBay or Card Market. Usually, I tend to also talk with people on Facebook groups, but the rest I don't tend to use. So, what advantages and disadvantages are there when you are trying to buy internationally? I'm not going to talk about the selling part because that's a completely different topic. So if you're an investor and you're still holding long term, it's not much of a concern for you in the short term because you want to get the best buy for your buck, so to say. So the advantages are if you want to buy from wherever, it tends to be like a fairly easy setup and there's not much required, only for you to like verify and have your funds ready. And you can reach out to the entire world. So basically, whichever tool you tend to or pivot towards naturally, it has most of the coverage throughout the entire world. And the bigger the coverage, the better offers you tend to get. But the disadvantages are, I would say, only when you're buying outside of the European Union, and that is also like due to economic reasons and also various postal issues, I would say. So there's like risk of damaging your shipment or even like the contents of your shipment. But also, if you're buying outside of the EU, there's various fees, tariffs, custom duties, shipping differences, exchange rates, and whatnot. We will cover that later in the video. And due to that fact, you might get like overpriced scarce items that are not like readily available in the European Union. What I mostly see as an example is that if you want to, for example, buy a Pokemon Center ETB, like those are very scarce, and you would have to pay extra premium to get something like that. So it's a little bit different in that sense. So what should you do before you start buying? You definitely need to do quite a lot of research depending on what your interests are in the hobby. If you want to get involved like very quickly and you just want to buy and collect, that's perfectly fine. But if you're in the investor space, as I mentioned before, you want to get the most out of the amount that you currently have at your disposal. So why is the European market different? How does it work? And like how do investors think long term in Europe? What risks are involved in terms of like the investing space in Europe? So the difference between like the US or international markets and Europe, from what I gathered over the years, is that it goes mostly in tandem with the US market. Like whenever you have any kind of price or trend or I don't know, whatever new set comes around, people tend to look at the dollar amount rather than any Europe benchmark in terms of the pricing. Also, you have like different shopping tools, as I mentioned before. Like there are various restrictions throughout the countries, so not everyone has an equal chance of using them. And also there are regulations between like EU countries where you probably would want to buy, I don't know, different kinds of products from various countries that are on the other end of the European Union, and you want to receive them like post haste, but you cannot. It just takes too long. But then again, if you're like a neighboring country, the postal services and the regulations that they have may be swifter than in other countries, so you have to take that also into account. So people, when they buy, they don't only look at the reputation of the buyer, but where the buyer is actually living. And based on what you buy, in most cases, you tend to get experience from various kinds of buying opportunities that you tend to conclude, and you get the feel of how long it might take for you to receive an item. And in the riskier cases, you also get a feel like if these countries have a worse service overall in terms of delivery. Um, then the other point is like local markets tend to differentiate based on population in each state. Now, what I mean by that is that not every country has the exact same population, and therefore the market then differentiates locally. So if you, for example, post an item in Germany, and you live in a big city, there's a higher chance that someone will respond like, "Hey, can we meet up and can we like exchange cards or can we get like a better cost and we can negotiate a little bit better." So local markets tend to be quite different in terms of the velocity in this sense. So if you are living in a smaller country where locally you don't have the opportunity or there's not that many people that try to invest or collect, then the liquidity of any asset that you have at your disposal that you're trying to sell might be not that liquid, or it might take longer for you to sell that item. You might even need to resort like to the other online tools for you to sell the item if that is the case, but then you get a worse price. And since Europe is very diverse in terms of the languages, there tend to be times, not that often, but sometimes where there's like language barriers from various countries where they don't really want to communicate in English, but try to communicate with you in their native language. In modern days, it's not such a big of an issue because you have AI tools that can naturally like translate any kind of um, communication. But still, if issues arise with the package, then it might be a little bit troublesome to explain and try to get a hold of the person because also like the culture between countries is somewhat different in some cases, and the approach to handling issues can vary as well. So how do investors think long term? The short answer would be like they think as any other investor, just buy at the best possible price and hold it for as long as possible and sell at the most appropriate time. But the bad part about it is that since the trends are coming mostly from outside of Europe, Europe goes in tandem with the information that's coming from US mostly. So whenever you try to negotiate any kind of price, the price is mostly reviewed in dollars, and whichever benchmark for a particular product is set on the price um, can be a little bit different just because of the currency rate and the amount of items that are between available between the US and Europe. But once a trend starts in the US, Europe tends to follow, but it's very slow to react on that trend. So US has definitely an advantage in terms of what they pick up and what they find interesting and what kind of speculation can happen so that they are ahead of the curve when it comes to other people. So if you're an investor in Europe, not like a scalper or anything, but if you tend to find various opportunities, then it's good to look at like the US market, what it does, and try to figure out based upon that approach what they are thinking, what they are promoting, what they are shilling, so to say, if it's a good play for you in Europe and if it makes sense to go that route as well, or try to look at the European market from a different perspective and try to figure out like if a different product can um, jump in price if you identify a better suitable opportunity based on scarcity and quality and the type of Pokemon that you're trying to collect. So there are also like as I mentioned, we have like more delayed response towards the trend because of also like the shifting time zones and whatnot. But overall, if you compare pricings on the US market and on the European market, the prices are a little bit more conservative. Maybe that has also something to do with the conversion rate, but overall, if you are a person that is naturally like following what is going on the US market and try to compare it, for example, on card market, because that's like a good benchmark to look at, you will see that if you are looking at a US pricing of a particular booster box that is of higher value, and you're like, hey, this is actually quite a like a good, I don't know, pricing for that particular product, and you really like looking at it, and you would like to sell at that particular price point, then you'll figure out that on the European market, there's not that big of a opportunity, so to say. So the pricing is way smaller in comparison to the US trends. In many cases, you can also find like opportunities that are exactly the same pricing, and also in very, very rare cases, you can find opportunities like vice versa, where there's like good pricing in Europe and you could probably sell to the US, I would assume. So it really depends on what you're aiming for. If you're thinking long term, my best advice is to like look locally, look for the best pricings where you are at, or if you have access to a distributor, that's even better. If you are a card shop, you probably have, but if not, if you're just a standard person with a budget, try to look at some kind of search engines. I assume that some engines have also the opportunity to like do comparisons on your local markets, like overall in your country, not only locally, but overall through the domain of the particular country. They provide like the service of comparisons between products and shops, what they are offering, so you can get like your Best Buy. So, what what risks are involved when you are buying internationally? So mostly buying from outside of EU are the only risks that you can tackle and that might occur. Normally, the only risks, and I think this is fairly normal, is if you are buying from within the EU, the risk of losing a shipment or damaging a shipment are fairly low. But outside of the EU, the risks are higher, at least from my experience. If you're buying between EU states, you can expect good quality of service and communication. So that's a very good thing overall. And globally, the experience is that the community for Pokemon is very receiving. It's a very good community. Apologies. And I feel that whenever I interact with someone, I don't have like this particular notion of being suspicious or dealing with someone who doesn't understand what they are doing. So it's very, very rare that you come across someone who doesn't understand like the gist of the Pokemon market. So even since this is a very vast hobby and there are various kinds of products, cards and Pokemon, people tend to know what what you're talking about, so you don't even have to like explain yourself. So it's a good community that's well educated and understanding of the topic. Uh, the one risk or maybe possibly a downside is that prices are mostly set based on the US price charts and pop reports. So since there's not like a good enough um, good enough service to grade your cards, for example, in Europe, like people tend to mostly send the cards to PSA by conciliary service. It basically means that we are kind of dependent on the US in this case. Like there are some grading services, but they are not as recognized, and therefore the prices and everything is not that really accepted. People tend to buy them for collecting, like any graded card that is outside of like PSA, but it still stands to reason to invest in like the long-term holdings for PSA 10 and any kind of other company like Beckett, um, CGC, and currently I would assume, and I would also like to invest in TAG graded cards. But Tag is fairly young and it still needs a little bit of room to grow. So we'll see how things go. So moving on, buying from the US or other countries outside of the EU, what can you expect if you're buying from the US? There's a whole process that goes directly into buying, for example, like slapped cards. I'm going to give you an example on a PSA 9 or a PSA 10. So what you can expect is that whenever you buy something, you have to adjust the pricing between the dollar and the euro. So the currency conversion rate of that day is in place every time when you buy. Then there are like shipping costs. These can vary based on the country that you reside in Europe. And afterwards, when you buy the item and the conversion rate is applied and the shipping costs are also there, you still need to um, add the import VAT on top of that price. So it varies based on country. I added just an example, 20%. Also, all the other handling fees like custom duties and handling fees are very based on country. So even the custom duties based on the amount can go higher as the item is much more expensive. And handling fees, these can and probably won't apply depending on the country that you live in because every country has a different application of when to apply the handling fees. So, for example, if you have an item uh, that is underneath like 150 euro threshold, I assume, then you might not be charged with handling fees, for example. And I have an inconsistency there with the PSA 10, like the handling fees are applied there naturally because it's above 150 euros. So disregard that part. But overall, if you look at the amounts that you are trying to pay, if you are trying to look at the pricing between EU and, like for example, eBay in the US, and you're trying to buy a card, what you can expect is that comparison-wise, if you buy a card that has a cost basis of $85, which is 78 euros after conversion, adding the shipping fees and adding what on top of it gives you the subtotal of 115 euros ish on average. And once you apply also like the custom duties and handling fees, you get a total of 137 euros. This I'm showing you this because when I look at these prices and in these terms, I'm thinking that okay, if I have the cost basis of the total for one PSA 9 card of 137 euros, does that mean that also the pricing in Europe, for example, on card market, should be like 137 euros? That's not the case. It's somewhere between like a plus 20% higher because some people also tend to flip these kinds of products and want to make a little bit extra on the side. But then again, you also have to calculate the shipping costs that are not calculated within the buying from the US because you will be also buying from someone from the card market. So your best option in this case, in some cases, is to buy directly from eBay if you make this calculation and if it makes sense for you to buy it from eBay directly rather from, for example, card market. Now for PSA 10, this is the same approach. If you have, for example, like a $660 card, then your cost basis is the 610 euros after conversion, 18 euros shipping costs, and then you add the import VAT on top with custom duties and handling fees, which brings you to a total of 790-ish euros. Mind you, again, that this is not the final price for card market because card market tends to be expensive again and plus shipping added. So when you do buy stuff for investing this way, you can go generally and look at price charts with keeping in mind that on the price charts, if you look up a card and you select a specific card you want to buy, then you can follow the formula of multiplying the price that was there before shipping, only the selling price in dollars, and multiplying it by 1.6 or 1.4 if no handling fees apply, and then you'll get your total price in euros. So you don't have to go through the process of calculating it over and over again. You just can stick to this formula. And if you buy a PSA 10, then the formula would be times 1.2 to the price before shipping and VAT, which would bring you to the total price in euros. So if you are investing in slabs, I personally also invest in PSA 9s. That's why I'm mentioning PSA 9s. They are not that investable. You have to, that's a very niche market and you have to do your research. For PSA 10s, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you have that kind of budget, then you can follow this simple rule and you can compare the prices on between eBay and car market and where they are currently residing. So even like in the span of time, you can compare it through various days and see how the prices evolve and how quickly Europe then also reacts. But as I mentioned, we go in tandem and we don't react that quickly. So this is all I wanted to tell for today. I hope this gave you some information, and I will see you then next time. Please do like and subscribe if you like this type of content, and I will continue on doing these kinds of educational videos, and also I will post videos about price comparisons to give you a broader sense of how the market prices and places the prices on card market or any other European available site that might be of interest. So have a nice day. This was Pokemon Viking with a W. I'll catch you next time.